this is Hida. A while back, a viewer suggested to me that I make a video about my academic journey, and at first I wasn't quite sure, but then I thought, yeah, my academic journey is a little bit unusual and it might be interesting. Since I'm not the biggest fan of videos that are just like a person talking to the camera the whole time, I thought that I would make a spread in my art journal while I talk about my academic journey. So a little quick recap before we start. I'm from Norway. I grew up in Norway, in Oslo. I have a master's degree in peace and conflict studies and a bachelor's degree in political science. And now let's rewind all the way to the beginning. I was 5 years old when I started elementary school, and in Norway we normally do 13 years of school in preparation for university. It's different if you want to work as like an electrician or a plumber or something, but for the sake of this video I'll simplify it to 13 years. 7 years of elementary school, 3 years of middle school, and 3 years of high school. In middle school and high school we have to do a second foreign language in addition to English, and in high school I was able to do Japanese instead of continuing with French like I did in middle school. In my second year of high school I went to England to spend 1 semester in Bath together with my classmates. We stayed with host families and it was my first experience living abroad. I had originally asked my parents if they'd let me go on exchange to Japan for the whole second year, but they said no. I was upset at the time, but today I'm really happy they didn't let me go because I got to know people later who said their experience was not very good, that the language barrier and culture shock was way too much for a 17-year-old to handle all by themselves on the other side of the planet. Going to England from Norway was a much softer introduction to studying abroad. I already spoke English fairly well, so I was able to fully experience the culture and the social life at school, and believe it or not, I used to have a British accent. After high school, I actually applied to a bachelor's program in Asian studies with focus on Japanese language in Denmark, but I wasn't accepted because of my grades. My grades in high school were fine, but not excellent. The only classes I really enjoyed were English, Japanese, social studies, and political history, so yeah, I wasn't accepted to that program, and I purposefully did not apply to any universities in Norway because I was fed up with the whole country. I know a lot of teenagers go through this and I just wanted to get away. I was pretty stupid for only applying to one university though, but I've always kind of just had a plan A and no backup plans. So at the end of high school, I felt a bit lost and I started working full-time at the part-time job I'd had throughout high school. A good friend of mine from Japanese class asked me, kind of jokingly, if we should just go to Japan because he didn't really have any plans either. And I was like, sure, let's do it. So I managed to get him a job at my workplace, and together we did so much research while working as many hours as we could to save up money. Mind you, this was back in late 2012. And there was not as much information about language schools, visa, and other immigrant stuff in Japan back then. There weren't nearly as many J-vloggers either, so we devoured the contents from like Charla and Michaela while dreaming of going to language school in Japan. Being the silly teenagers we were, we decided to pick one school to apply to because I didn't learn from my mistakes. Honestly, I don't know why we didn't apply to more, but I think it was because it cost quite a bit to apply, so we couldn't just apply to a ton of them. After going through the whole list of universities that were supported by Mixed back then, we had 3 candidates. Up until then, we hadn't really considered where in the country we wanted to go. We just knew we didn't want to go to Tokyo because coming from Oslo, a city with less than 1 million people, it just sounded terrifying. So yeah, we had these 3 candidate schools, all universities, not language schools, but they had language programs. There was one in Gifu Prefecture, one in Hyogo Prefecture, and one in southern Japan. I forget which prefecture, but it might have been Oita. So we did the only rational thing. We went into Google Maps and checked out the area using maps and Street View. All 3 schools were in really lovely areas, but only the one in Hyogo Prefecture was in a city called Kobe. We didn't really want to live in the countryside for our first time living in Japan, so we chose the school in Kobe. We applied and were told we had to pass the JLPT N5 test first, which is the lowest or easiest level to pass in the Japanese language proficiency test. At that time, the test wasn't even held in Norway at all, so my friend and I went on a budget weekend trip to Copenhagen to take it there. We studied so much for that test and we had a blast in Copenhagen. It was one of the first times I kind of felt a little bit like an adult. After taking the test, a representative from the university in Kobe actually flew all the way to Oslo so that we could do an entrance exam. And it's very common to do entrance exams when applying for universities in Japan, but we thought it was pretty insane that they would fly a person all the way to Norway for just 2 people, but whatever floats your boat, I guess. So we went to the airport hotel where he had rented a whole conference room and we did the entrance exam, which was pretty similar to the JLPT N5 if I remember correctly. We were super nervous, of course, but they admitted both of us to the program and we were over the moon. Getting the visa turned out to be super stressful. I actually got my visa the day before our flight, so yeah, it was chaos, but we arrived at Kansai International Airport and we had decided to go a week before our university contacts had asked us to arrive so that we could explore the city ourselves. We stayed at a hotel in Sanomiya in Kobe and we had the time of our lives, trying new foods every day, figuring out the train system and just being clueless 19-year-olds. We didn't have cell service and we just explored the city in a way we wouldn't do today because nowadays there's Wi-Fi everywhere. Even though this was in 2013, it was a different time. Our university had asked us if we wanted to live in a dormitory or in our own apartments, and we chose apartments because neither of us really wanted to share a room with anyone. So one morning, 2 representatives from the university came to pick us up and took us to our apartments. They really did so much for us. I'm really thankful for that university. Not only did they take care of the apartment leases, but they also took us to open bank accounts and get smartphones and cell service. They took care of our Wi-Fi at home and they also helped us figure out the most convenient route to the university. At one point, I got really bad food poisoning and one of the ladies at the office actually showed up at my door and took me to the doctor. So yeah, they took really good care of us. On our first day of school, I remember I was super nervous. Our teachers were amazing people though, and they were so great at making themselves understood even though they only spoke Japanese to us. I owe a lot of my Japanese skills to them. Oh, and I should also mention the name of the school. It's called Kobe International University and we were in the 1-year language program. We very quickly found out that all the other students were from Vietnam and China, and it was such an interesting experience to only be able to communicate in our broken Japanese since most of them didn't speak English and we didn't speak Mandarin or Vietnamese or anything. We made friends and our closest friend turned out to be a guy from the Philippines who was 1 level above us and he spoke better Japanese and English than either of us. I honestly think I would have missed out on so much had he not approached us, and I'm really grateful for that. So we spent a year in Kobe and I can honestly say it was the best year of my life. I think back on it and I have only fond memories despite having been in so many awkward situations and conversations because of the language barrier and so many confusing things happening because of culture differences. I had some great teachers and professors, one who wasn't even teaching the language program but just wanted to give us extra lessons in Japanese history. He even took us on a trip to Izu, which felt like a dream come true. I am really grateful to him as well. So after that 1 year, I didn't really know what to do. I just knew that I wanted to stay in Japan. I had sort of gotten a boyfriend along the way and he lived in Tokyo and just visited me in Kobe now and then. Honestly, he's a whole other story that I won't get into now, but yeah, I was curious about Tokyo and I did some research. Way too late in the fall, I might add, because when I found a program that I was interested in, it was the night before the deadline. It's such a Heda thing to do. I wrote my application in a hurry, gathered all my documents, which luckily I had with me, to Japan, and since Japan is so old-fashioned in some ways. I had to apply by mail, so I remember walking over to 7-Eleven at like 2 or 3 a.m. to print out my application papers and copies of all sorts of documents, since most convenience stores in Japan have scanners and printers and stuff, and then I mailed everything to Tokyo in the morning. I got through the first screening and was asked to come to Tokyo for the entrance exam. I remember there was a typhoon over Japan the exact day I was going to Tokyo, and the trip with the Shinkansen took like 6 or 7 hours because they had to close a bridge near Shizuoka because of flooding. I went to stay with a friend who lived near Tokyo. Near, not in. It was actually like 2 hours outside of Tokyo, so yeah. And there was a freaking earthquake that night too, so the whole thing was a big event, and I thought it was just so typical that all these natural disasters were happening right then. But yeah, I did my entrance exam at Waseda University, and a while later, when I was back in Kobe, I got my acceptance letter. I still didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but this was a liberal arts program, so I could basically choose whatever I wanted for my focus. So I moved to Tokyo and I moved into a dorm. Honestly, I wish I hadn't, because one of my roommates was the nastiest, messiest person I have ever encountered in my whole life, but that's a story for another time. Anyway, the dorm was brand new and it was only a couple of metro stops away from the campus, so it was all good. University was a lot of fun and I was able to take a lot of different kinds of classes and met lots of different people. Most of my classes were in English, and so the student body was maybe half Japanese, half international. Yeah, I broke up with my ex after I guess like half a year in Tokyo. The second year in Waseda University was not as good as the first, and the reason is that the system that they used for choosing classes was like a lottery system. So you applied for courses and then it was left to chance whether you got it or not. So I ended up getting only a couple of classes I really wanted to take, and then I had to choose a bunch of classes I wasn't that interested in. So my interest in my studies really fell. Most courses were worth between 1 and 4 credits, so you needed a lot of classes to get to the 20 or 21 credits or whatever the max limit was. And in my second year I also met Jordan, my current boyfriend. So yeah, I had lost interest in my studies because I wasn't able to take classes that I cared about. I felt like I was just paying tuition and being forced to study subjects I had no interest in, and it didn't feel very good. When my boyfriend had to go back to the US because his exchange was over, we talked about me going there with him, and I had such a huge identity crisis because Japan was what I was good at in a way. It felt like my whole life after having lived there for 3 years. So I felt really lost. I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I wasn't happy with my university, and I knew I wanted to be with my boyfriend because I was so in love, and you know how love just makes you kind of dumb. So I quit school. I felt like a failure, like I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. I ripped out the roots that I had laid down and I flew to the US. My boyfriend is from Utah, so I spent some months in Salt Lake City, basically without a purpose, like no school, no job, and obviously I couldn't stay forever because I was on a tourist visa. So after a few months I went back to Norway. I started working in a kindergarten. We made plans that I would apply for university in Salt Lake so that I could go back there with a proper visa. So I did. I had first applied to the University of Utah while I was staying in Salt Lake, and I was accepted there, but since I was a foreigner, I'd have to pay out-of-state tuition, and over $30,000 is not something I would be able to cover. So yeah, after going back to Oslo to work, I applied to Westminster College, which is a private college also in Salt Lake, and I was accepted there. It was about the same price actually, but they had scholarships, so my yearly tuition turned out to be cut in half. So back to Utah I went. Jordan and I found a new and better apartment, and I started university again. Now, I had made sure to take both the TOEIC and the TOEFL English language proficiency tests before leaving Japan, because it was the plan all along that I would try to apply to university in the US. So I had those already, and I was able to transfer most of my credits from Waseda University as electives and some as mandatory courses. The program I was admitted to was political science, and so I had some classes from Waseda that fit the model. I was also able to transfer some credits from Norwegian high school, since we do 13 years in Norway while Americans only do 12. At Westminster College, I had some amazing professors who were so welcoming and kind, and they made me fall in love with my studies again. I felt really rejuvenated and so happy to be back in school after a whole year off. I started in the spring semester, and I also paid extra tuition to take classes during the summer so that I could fill some mandatory credits in like natural sciences and history, which are these weird general education credits you have to do in the US. I was able to skip language classes because of all the Japanese credits I took in Tokyo, and I was also able to talk myself out of the diversity and art credits because of previous courses. I was even able to get out of a horribly boring class on the American Constitution because I just happened to have taken a course on the Japanese Constitution at Waseda University. So nothing is ever a waste. I was able to take courses that I cared for, like global politics, ecofeminism, food security, and lots of other politics and social justice courses. And I also did some very basic coding and food chemistry, which was quite fun. And this was also the year that I started bullet journaling. After having spent almost a year in Westminster College, Jordan and I started dreaming about going back to Japan. I knew that since I'd already completed all my mandatory courses because of my summer semester, I would be able to only focus on my bachelor's thesis come spring. So I decided to apply for an internship at the Norwegian embassy in Tokyo. They always have a lot of applicants, so I wasn't too confident, but I knew my Japanese was good and I really, really wanted it. One night I couldn't sleep and I was just lying awake, rolling around and staring at the ceiling. I randomly picked up my phone to check the time, and I'd gotten an email from the embassy just then telling me that I got the internship. It was such a surreal feeling. I had to call my parents right away. So off I went to Westminster College to get it cleared with them, and they were really positive to the opportunity, and my professor/supervisor said he'd be okay with working with me remotely. So we canceled our lease. We went to Norway for Christmas, and in the very end of January 2018, we went to Tokyo again. Honestly, it was a nightmare to write my bachelor's thesis while also working full-time at the embassy, but they were really nice and accommodating, and I was able to work on it while I was there, as well as take time off for field work, so I'm very grateful for that. I had so many cool experiences at the Norwegian embassy in Tokyo, and also horrible ones. As for the good experiences, I got to meet the Norwegian Prime Minister, our Defense Minister, and lots of other important people in Norwegian and Japanese politics. I went out for drinks with politicians and journalists, and I participated in huge conventions with Innovation Norway, and I met other European interns as well. But I also passed out on the train one morning and cried in my boss's office, so I guess I've done it all. Miraculously, I managed to graduate, having written my bachelor's thesis on Japanese environmentalism. I focused on the philosophies that guide certain NGOs in Japan. It was very rewarding work, and I'm still really proud of that thesis. I got an A too, so that's awesome. So I know that the timeline is a little bit confusing, but basically I spent 2013 in language school in Kobe, 2014 and 2015 in Waseda University in Tokyo, and then I spent most of 2016 being lost in Salt Lake City and in Oslo, then 2017 in Westminster College in Salt Lake City, and then the spring of 2018 in Tokyo again. So the spring, while I was at the embassy, I thought about my future a lot, and I decided to apply for a master's program at the University of Oslo in Norway. I was intrigued by diplomacy and international relationships after having spent half a year at the embassy, and I knew that to have a chance of getting into that field at all, I would need to have studied at least partly in Norway, because up until this point, my last experience from Norway was high school. So I applied for 3 programs at the University of Oslo, and I didn't get into any of them. Their reasoning was that I didn't have the correct courses from my bachelor's to get into the master's program. Norwegian universities are very strict about this, but I really wanted it, so I spent hours putting together course descriptions from all the courses I had ever studied in university, both at Waseda University and at Westminster College. college and put together groups of courses that I believed fit their criteria. And sure enough, they probably had just looked at my list of courses and hadn't seen the exact words they were looking for and declined me because of that. But after I presented this lengthy description, like so many documents, they agreed to run it past the faculty again. I ended up still getting declined by 2 of the programs, but I got into the 3rd one. So after graduating from Westminster College and having finished my internship in Tokyo, I moved home to Oslo, Norway. I was nervous about starting university in Norway because, like I said, I hadn't been studying in Norway since high school, and at this point that was like 6 years prior. My master's program was in English, which I felt really good about because my whole academic journey up until that point had been in English and Japanese, and I just felt like my academic Norwegian was seriously lacking. The first semester and parts of the second semester was very interesting, but during the second semester I started feeling like the courses weren't really what I was most interested in, so I took some electives from outside of the faculty. I haven't been good with like mathematics and numbers since like middle school, so statistics was really hard. I got a D. It's my one and only D, except for that one aerobics dance class that I took in Tokyo for easy credits. Turns out it wasn't so easy because I suck at dancing. But anyway, yeah, I got a D. It sucked, but I didn't fail, and that made me really happy. So I started writing my master's thesis, but I didn't do well mentally, and I had to move, and it was all a bit complicated. My doctor got me partly sick leave during the first semester of the second year since my mental health was really bad. It gradually got better in the 4th semester, but by then COVID-19 had struck, and so there was that whole thing too. In the end, I postponed handing in my thesis by 1 semester, so I handed it in December 2020. But considering I had a sick leave in the middle there, I guess technically I only postponed half a semester. I got a C on my thesis, which a couple of years ago would have felt like a disaster, but at this point I was like, F it. I actually handed it in. I did the work, and I know I'm good at writing, and I learned so much, so the grade kind of takes a back seat. And that was the end of my life as a student, for now at least. I don't have any plans to go back to school at this point. I'm 27 years old, and I just want to put what I've learned during my studies into practice. I want to gain experiences and learn through doing and not just through reading. One thing I learned in my 20s is that it's okay if things don't exactly go according to plan, because most good things happen by accident anyway. I'm so grateful for all the experiences that I've had, both the good and the bad ones. My academic journey is a bit confusing, and I find that I often need to explain the transferring and the timeline because it's quite abnormal, but in the end I think it shows that I've been brave and I tried my best. I also had to learn that I study for myself and that gaining the knowledge is much more important to me than the grades that I get. It took me almost 9 years from the end of high school to the end of my master's program, and these years have been so interesting. I'm so happy I moved to Kobe in 2013, and I'm so happy I moved to Tokyo, and I'm so happy that I followed my heart to Salt Lake City, and also that I moved back to Oslo and got to see my family more, and I got to reconnect with my brothers who were only like 15 and 17 when I moved out. So there you have it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Feel free to ask me whatever. I don't know if I'll be able to answer everything, but I'll do my best. I hope that you feel that you got to know me a little better through this video. If you watched the whole thing, comment some book emojis so that I know that you watched it until the end. I know it's been a long one. Thank you so much for watching. My bullet journal setup for March will be up next week, so I hope that you'll stay tuned for that. And I also have a big announcement coming up in the end of February. So yeah, lots of exciting things happening. I hope that you're all having a lovely day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!